Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball!
Welcome to a very special episode of the Don Sullivan Show. As you can hear, Don is currently on the road, and you're going to learn more about that very shortly. I'm your co-host, Jersey Steve. First, we want to thank our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service. Whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware, License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. You can learn more at licensefortress.com. And please support our producer, our wonderful producer, Bill Axt, by visiting axtinc.com. That is AXTINK.com. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation, as well as run our website, all while researching a cure for baldness.
Hello again, everyone, and once again, welcome to this special edition of the Don Sullivan Show. Today we will be going solo, as Steve will not be joining us for the live broadcast, but he'll have lots of comments before and after this particular episode. So today we are going to start a series on the technology of transportation. And then in this special episode of the Don Sullivan Show, the vast audience of the Don Sullivan Show will be able to experience and join with us as we take a ride on an actual historic railroad. Now, railroads have fascinated kids and adults alike for centuries. I know that I loved watching trains fly by growing up in northern New Jersey. My grandfather was an engineer in World War I and in northern New Jersey for all of his professional life. My dad sadly took me to see the famous RFK flag-draped train fly by through Rutherford, New Jersey on its mission to take Bobby back to D.C. in June of 1968. In 1985, I took an Amtrak around the entire United States. I slept on the train, got off every now and then, and really developed a love of what trains could do, particularly Amtrak in that case. The trip took a week, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Now, railroads played a very important part in the development of the economic dynamo of the United States, specifically in the 19th century. There were standards that were developed all around the world, but in many places, specifically in the mountains of the American West, the gauge, that is the amount of distance between the rails, was just simply insufficient to negotiate steep slopes and sharp turns of the precarious peaks and cliffs of Colorado, California, Wyoming, Utah, and some other states. To solve the problem, in one of the many innovative events of U.S. history, the narrow gauge, specifically the narrow gauge for the American West, was developed. Now, there are other narrow gauges that were developed around the world. I think the first was developed in Wales, and even today in Japan there are some narrow gauge rails in use. But the American West's narrow gauge was very, very short-lived, but had a glorious history, and it's worth talking about and learning about, and we're going to do that here. Most of the railroads in the American West, again, had a short lifespan as effective tools of commerce, but today some of them have been transformed into historic and scenic tourist and educational experiences. And today, we will be taking a ride on the magnificent Durango-Silverton Railroad. So we're about to get on board, and we will hopefully have some conversations with conductors, guides, and other experts, along with experiencing some amazing western Colorado scenery. So please get on with us and let's have some fun conversations over the next 6 or 7 hours. For you all, it'll only be 30 minutes. But let's have some conversations and let's have some fun. And let's learn something about the narrow gauge railroads of the American West. Well, folks, we're here on board the beautiful and historic Durango-Silverton Railroad, sitting in the last car, the Alamosa car, and our takeoff or leaving of the station is at 9 a.m. and we're waiting for everyone to board. This is absolutely exquisite and amazing historical view of how everything looked 100 years ago in a relatively higher class level of service. And we're going to have some great scenery, and again, we're going to hopefully talk to lots of experts, the conductors and guides and so on. So let's get going. I'm sure you can hear the chatter and whistle of the train getting ready to go. It's actually 3 different trains that go on 3 different routes through the Animas Canyon and other areas between Durango and Silverton in southwest Colorado. And there's going to be lots of background noise here today, and that makes it all real. Lots of chatter, lots of fun. You should hear some kids yelling and screaming too. Very, very cool. It's an amazing experience, something that I personally waited for a long, long time. Wish my dad was here to see some of this. He would love it. My parents actually tried to take this train about 10 years ago, but some Colorado fires actually had caused the entire system to shut down during that summer. I think it was 2016, but it was at least 10 years ago around then. So we're going to be able to do it now. Well, we're moving along, folks. We're going through the town of Durango at the moment. A little bit later on today, we're going to have a couple of different interviews, at least one, of a very, very interesting person who has been on this particular railroad as a conductor and a brakeman and a lot of other different roles for over 30 years. But let's get going here. So as we're driving through this amazing area between Durango and Silverton, it's really interesting to me to point out the variety of the different ancient rock formations. And we've on the Don Sullivan Show had a number of different episodes that focused on the Morrison Foundation in western Colorado and even around Denver, which is the later part of the Jurassic period. But from Durango to Silverton, the rock formation is Chinle, which is upper or later Triassic period, which is in the 66 to 75 million year ago period, just before the end of the Mesozoic era and the demise of the dinosaurs. It looks different, but it's still all red rock, not quite sandstone-ish, at least in the terms of it being slippery to walk on and so on. But it's truly overall amazing. The mountains themselves are at the far eastern end of the Colorado Plateau, where the Colorado River itself moves down to become, as what I refer to it as, the greatest artist in the history of this planet, as it cuts through all of Canyonlands National Park and Marble Canyon into the Grand Canyon, down into the Sea of Cortez eventually. But I digress. We're going to be continuing on here for many, many hours, so I'm going to be hopping in and out with lots of commentary on what we see. We've crossed over the Animas River. We're going to be doing it a couple of times. We're proceeding along here in this narrow gauge railroad at about 13 to 15 miles an hour, bouncing back and forth. What is amazing is that every movie that you see, and there's been a lot of movies that have been made, including Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, using this train, that whenever you see people sitting around with their Clint Eastwood cool, playing poker or drinking whiskey, Hollywood doesn't ever depict the rolling back and forth of the train. They always shows how cool the various different characters are as they're drinking their whiskey and playing their poker, and nothing's falling off the table, and there's lots of space, and some Wyatt Earp-like figure has got his hand on his 6-shooter ready to shoot out the spectacles of somebody in the back of the train. So I don't think that kind of precision would be possible on a train that's bouncing back and forth, in which I can barely speak into the microphone that I'm recording the Don Sullivan Show now. But it is incredibly fun nonetheless. I don't think anybody here is going to have any issues with any kind of car sickness, but you never know. We'll see. Well, everyone, we just passed an area called the Railroad Post Office, which of course has nothing to do with actual postal parcels, but what it has to do with is a place for all the various different stocked materials, stocked equipment to be located. The extra train cars and the emergency vehicles. It's very interesting about this particular train is that, or all of the Durango-Silverton rails or railroads, is that there are trains there are cars that go in front and in back of the train. Ones in front are checking to see if there are obstructions in the road, particularly obstructions in the rail, particularly in the winter. And the ones in back pick up actual stuff that is dropped by not only just passengers, but knocked off the road, knocked off the cliffs onto the track by the railroad going by, the train going by, which happens more often than you would be comfortable with, I think. But it's very interesting. There was all kinds of really heavy equipment to make this particular route and railroad work. I don't exactly know what happened or how they did this back in the 1800s. Maybe they just figured it out as they went along. I suspect they probably did, but that's how it works now. No discussion of any of these railroads, particularly the mountain railroads out west, would be complete without discussing some of the darker sides of the construction of these amazing paradigms of technology. And to build this 45 miles of track between Durango and Silverton, as was the case for many of these, all of the railroads out here, to actually cut while they were building these tremendously dangerous and tremendously, I'm just overwhelmed right now. These views that exist along the cliffs, to actually create the ledges to lay the railroads on. Enormous amounts of explosions were necessary, and what had to be done was workers, usually Chinese immigrants, certainly out in the West, and Irish immigrants in the East, but Chinese immigrants here had to be lowered down from the cliffs to drill, meaning hand chip away the various different holes in which dynamite was plugged into. And after the holes were drilled, the dynamite would be plugged into it, lit, and a signal would be given. And the person in the basket that was laid down would be pulled up. And sometimes they made it and sometimes they didn't. And that actually is the basis for the terminology of to hell in a handbasket. Yeah, that's true. And a lot of people died because they didn't make it up upon the explosions. But eventually, this rail was cut, this road was cut, and holy cow, people gave their lives for it, and we respect them, but it was certainly not something that would be approved by OSHA today. Even for a veteran of high places like me, as I've been through and on top of very high peaks throughout all of Colorado, and to be honest, most of the world, driving on these extremely narrow lines throughout the mountains, in which we know that people have died, as I just described, to create the rails themselves. It's very disconcerting. You can almost see and feel the spirits of those who were responsible, those who deserve the credit, I suppose is the way you say it, for having created such magnificent historical and effective piece of American history and world history, and the technology that went behind that. Again, it was brutal and ridiculous in terms of the lack of safety that was involved, but that was the way things were back in the 1800s, 1881 in particular, when this 45 miles was built. I thought I would take a little bit of time to come out in the back of the train and look out and take some pictures, and doing that, we're driving along, moving along at a good 12, 13 miles an hour now over a 75-foot train trestle. You can see the Animas River on both sides. It's flowing down at an enormously intense and fierce rate down the mountain. I don't see any kayakers or river floaters out there, but I imagine there must be at some point. It's absolutely gorgeous. That's another subject that we'll do on the Don Sullivan Show. It'll be a little bit harder to actually do a live broadcast while we're in a actual float or a trip that's doing whitewater rafting, as I'm seeing right now, but we're going to try to do that at some point. But yeah, this is pretty amazing looking out at the tracks going along the Animas River here. So, be back to you in a second. The grandeur of the majestic rock as we move along the Animas River here, that is pierced by the whitewater rafting, again without any kayakers or whitewater rafter floaters, is not only serene and ominous, but it's the actual fantasies, the dreams of landscape photographers, landscape artists. I am amazed that no one from the Hudson River School in the 1800s, the Bierstadt, the Morans, ever really got up here, at least that I know of, to depict any of this scenery in their magnificent, somewhat impressionist art, particularly Moran. But I am just at the moment overwhelmed as we see the slight mist of the steam coming off the train. Of course, they didn't use steam back in the 1800s. It was coal, but it's steam now, and you can still see it and smell it a little bit. And it's absolutely amazing. Here we go past a massive whitewater rafting area, or whitewater waterfall, really. The narrowness of the canyon is such that it would be extremely dangerous for anybody to get stuck and caught within this. And another waterfall akin to some of those waterfalls at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, which again, hopefully at some point we'll do a Don Sullivan Show from down in the bottom of the Grand Canyon and some of those whitewater rafts. But these are in no way any less than those in the canyon themselves. So following up on the power generation for the Durango-Silverton Railroad, it's actually uses water, obviously, to cool everything down. Apparently, it takes in 10,000 gallons per actual trip. And it's partially steam, but it's a combination of oil and recycled oil, not coal, obviously, as it was in the 1800s, but there is an oil, and there's an oily smell, as I mentioned, but it's all recycled, and it uses steam as well. So it's a combination of interesting 1800s, 19th century, and 20th century technology that power this historic, magnificent railroad. So some of the stories we're being regaled with here on this trip are the stories of the various different movies and series that were shot. Kevin Costner shot some of Horizon in 2024. On This Train, Around the World in 80 Days had videos shot here. I think I've mentioned already that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid had scenes shot off. The scene where Butch and Sundance are starting their jump into the river is done from the very high train trestle or near it. That's a lot of fun to see that Hollywood history and many other scenes from different Western types of movies and videos and series that actually have their historical imprint printed on this exact train that we're sitting on right now. So we just passed through an area called Cascade Canyon, which is the terminus for the winter route on the Durango-Silverton Railroad. And I always find it particularly fascinating. The best technology sometimes is so simple. It's so simple because the human mind can come up with amazingly innovative ideas. The keep it simple philosophy, or the Occam's razor idea, it really does always apply. And in this particular case, the train itself during the winter is turned around completely, not with a train wheel you might see in San Francisco, but it actually is a separate set of tracks that simply backs out and then moves forward and turns the other way. It's actually called a Y system, W-Y-E, an amazing Scrabble word, I might add. Certainly a SAT word as well. But look it up. That's really interesting. It looks like a Y and it acts like a Y, W-Y-E. And it simply works to turn the train around during the winter routes. So we're getting off the train here in Silverton, and it's an amazing bit of a chemistry lesson that you can actually have here in these towns in Colorado. So many of them are named after various different minerals. Minerals, of course, that were mined, such as silver and Silverton and Copper Mountain and so on. What is amazing about the area around Silverton, though, is that the amount of actual iron, the amount of iron in this late Jurassic formation is tremendous. And the river, the Animas River, as it flies down through the canyons into Cascade Canyon, actually has so much iron that the water, as it pours down, causes a rusting stain or a rusting look, a beautiful iron look on the sides of the canyon, the sides of the river, and it causes the water itself, not from algae, as is often the case, but from the actual rust, to actually look green. So the water is green, and the sides of the canyon are rusty orange. It's an amazing look. It's utterly beautiful. So I've taken some pictures, and those pictures will be in the collateral for this particular episode. So we'll be back on the train here in a couple hours, and we'll hopefully interview Jennifer, who is going to be our resident expert today. So see you in a little bit. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Don Sullivan Show, and we have a real treat right now today. I have Jennifer, personal friend of noted historian Kevin Costner, who is a brakeman and a first-class guide and been doing this for 32 years. So welcome to the Don Sullivan Show, Jennifer. Tell the vast audience of the Don Sullivan Show, how did you get involved in this amazing profession?
Well, honestly, it was just a summer job. I was going to school at Fort Lewis College, and they were having a job fair at this little train. And I was so excited. I thought, what an exciting, different type of job. And so I applied. And for the first 10 years, I was just working summers. And then after that, I became full-time.
So, and the rest is history, and not just for you, but for the railroad itself and beyond. And you did a great job of explaining to your audience a little while ago what the real reason for narrow gauge was as opposed to standard gauge. Do you mind telling my audience that?
Sure. So narrow gauge, according to us, the distance between our rails are 3 feet compared to standard gauge, which is 4 feet, 8.5 inches. And so the more narrow of the rails really allowed us to climb steep grade. On the Durango and Silverton Railroad, our steepest grade is 4%. And so the narrow rails really allowed us to kind of wind up the mountain, wind up the hill to get to Silverton. Standard gauge was really built for distance and speed. So like Amtrak, your big freight haulers, they are all standard gauge, 4 feet, 8.5 inches. And standard gauge was actually based on the original wheel width of the old Roman chariot wheels, because that was the average distance between 2 horses' butts.
How Italian. It's amazing. So are narrow gauges used anywhere else in the world? I think in Japan, they're still actually in use around Mount Fuji and so on. Any place else you know?
I believe so. We do have our sister railroad. It is called the Cumbres and Toltec. And that is
right?
in New Mexico. And so that's another one. But there are several others. I can't think right off the top of my head.
I mean, for something commerce as opposed to just a historic attraction.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure.
You're not sure? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Something else that I found fascinating is the communications mechanism of the whistles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hike a lot. I'm at high altitude a lot, and we have our own little single, almost binary communication mechanism for whistles, but you guys have one that's a lot more sophisticated. In fact, you're about to blow 4 whistles to tell everybody to get back on the train.
Right.
Where did that come from? It's not quite binary, but it's came from somewhere.
Well, actually, some of our whistle signals are based on Morse code. So a crossing signal, for instance, is long, long, short, long. And that's actually Morse code for the letter Q, because when the queen used to pull into the harbors on our ships, that's the sound that they would make. So a lot of it is for Morse code. 2 short whistles, it's called a highball, and that means for us to proceed. 1 long and 1 short is a warning whistle, and it just lets people know that the train is coming. So it's an excellent, and sophisticated form of communication. And it's actually universal.
Yeah, well, if it comes from Morse code, it's going to be, to a certain extent at least. That's really interesting. The original date of the building of this particular 45 miles of wonderful track was 1881, which is an incredible year in U.S. history. Year of the gunfight at the OK Corral, where the Cowboy War started, and of course that was all about the silver in Tombstone, Arizona. But it's about the silver up here too, isn't it?
Yes.
So, what else was there any other purpose of it from a commercial perspective? Until, of course, later, 100 years later, or 75 years later, it became a tourist attraction. Was there anything else, or is it all about the silver?
It was really about the transporting of the ore. So from from Silverton down to the smelters in Durango. So really, processing all of the silver and a little bit of gold, but the silver up at this high elevation wasn't very economical. And so the whole purpose was to transport the ore.
That's because of the oxygen?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
And so transporting it to 7,000 feet compared to processing at, 10, 11,000 feet, it was just a lot more economical. So that was the whole purpose. And then, there was some passengers, but in the 80s is when they weren't really transporting a lot of the ore. And so that's when it became 1980s. Yes, not 1880s, 1980s is where it became more passenger service.
So you had a really clever way of of stating how far it was. It's obviously 1/3 the distance as the crow flies, but you said that it was much better, it was much more interesting and effective to take the high road up through the mountain passes and so on. I found that particularly clever. So other than the cliffs and occasional landslides and avalanches, any real dangers in this train?
Well, I think if you think about the biggest danger would be our locomotive. And so I feel that the fireman on the locomotive is the most important person on this entire train. And so if you compare...
The fireman being the person who actually runs the power, not just deals with potential fires.
True. So you have the engineer and the fireman, and they're up at the locomotive.
Used to be the people who dug the used to be the folks who piled the coal into the fire, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, they used to shovel coal. I feel that the fireman is most important because if you think of the locomotive as a tea kettle, and if you have a lot of heat underneath that tea kettle, but you don't have any water, what could happen to that tea kettle?
It's gonna blow up.
Exactly. It's gonna burn, it's gonna scorch, and it could blow up. And so with our locomotives, if there's no water in the engine and it blows up, it's not just, affecting a few feet. It's affecting potentially 4 city blocks.
Water causes all the major explosions on Earth, including volcanoes. So there you go. Water doesn't squeeze very well.
So that would be one of the biggest, I guess, scary things that could happen on the railroad. Sometimes you have an occasional rock that comes down off of the cliffs and, we've got to stop.
That ever happened before?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a story in the afternoon. I'm going to tell you about that.
I can't wait. I'll tell you guys that later. I'll have to hold on to that one.
Yep. And then, there's an occasional, maybe a small forest fire.
We had big wildfires.
Or
canceled the whole season, I think, in 2016, right?
2018.
2018.
Yes.
And my parents had tickets, and they couldn't go. They had to cancel them. Yeah.
That was a tough one.
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, 2018. Huh?
Yeah. So Mother Nature is probably one of our biggest, fears.
Yeah, of course. It usually is. So what about, other than Kevin Costner, how about any major celebrities that have been taking this ride? Let's go all the way back to the beginning. How about Doc Holliday? Was he ever on this,
Ooh, I believe so. I'm not sure, though. I don't have total verification if he's ridden the train, but he definitely did romp around Silverton. This was kind of a stomping grounds.
Up to Glenwood from Tucson and so on.
Some of my personal people that have ridden the train early on, Michael J. Fox, Christy Brinkley. I got to host Oprah.
Oh, wow.
Kelly Ripa.
Did you get a car?
Yes, no, none of us got a car. None of us got a car. But so those are most.
Well, that's a lot of fun. So what are the most exotic places that people have come from that have been on this train with you?
You know what? I fortunately have had people from, I think, every single continent, and it has been fascinating to hear their life stories. I remember one couple in particular was from Tasmania, and just so beautiful.
Tasmanian devils.
That's exactly what I thought of when I first talked to them, and just their excitement to be able to travel that far. And
it is far.
It's very far. But they were so excited, and so it's just a blessing to have anyone to come and ride this train and their story and what they bring. I mean, I've learned a lot of my history from the people that have ridden the train, and they've had their grandfathers and their great grandfathers ride the train. So from all over the world.
So let me digress for a moment. What about maintenance? Now, I've been on the Cascade Canyon trip in the winter, and there's a lot of snow. There's a lot of snow, and it only goes up to that. And the point being that this train goes year-round. Maybe not all three of them, but the train goes year-round. So how do you perform maintenance on what is a pretty rough environment? It's got to need a lot of maintenance.
So we have a track crew that we call Maintenance of Way, or we just call them MOW for short. And Maintenance of Way is responsible for pretty much all things track maintenance. Our right of way is between 100 and 200 feet from the middle of the rails on both sides of the track, minus the river. We don't maintain the river. But, a lot of maintenance is making sure that, trees are cleared, fire mitigation, making sure that, the tracks are nice and level. But they get what's called a work authority. And so they work from a certain time. And then when that work authority ends, they may have to pull all of their equipment off the rails because the trains have authority. And I'm not saying that, we're better than them, but we're just a little bit bigger. So they usually work after trains pass. That's how they're able to maintain the tracks. And then during the wintertime, so we go from May through October, we go all the way to Silverton. We take a 3-week break in November. And then at the end of November, we start our Cascade Canyon run, and we go until the end of April. So if by chance there's not a lot of snow from Cascade Canyon to Silverton, in the wintertime, they can do a little bit of maintaining.
What about the cars, though? What about the locomotives?
So Car Shop is responsible for all the car maintenance. And so every single year, each particular car gets its annual exam. And sometimes they have to completely take the car apart. Sometimes there's just small little fixes. But every single night that we roll in, Car Shop guys, they have their flashlights and they're looking at every single thing while we're going. Good, So they're just doing a quick inspection.
That makes me feel good.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Every night and every morning, they do a quick inspection of every single car. They're looking at leaf springs. They're looking at brakes. They're looking at transfer plates. They're looking at hoses in between all of the cars.
We're about to go down a lot of distance here.
Exactly.
And over some narrow cliffs. And I've been describing over the last hour the actual ride and the cliffs themselves. And it's pretty ominous.
Roundhouse is responsible for all things with locomotives. And so, again, every night, that is inspected, the locomotive is inspected, but it's also inspected by the engineer. Every time we stop for a water stop, the engineer gets off and he or she will oil certain parts of that locomotive. They're checking leaf springs. They're checking everything. Oh, here comes our four whistles.
Okay, so we have to finish up here, but I will ask you one last question to finish this. Any plans for the future? Anything that's going to big happen in the next number of years that we should pay attention to, that I should come back for?
Oh, well, I think that the changing of the seasons is always something worth coming back for. If you haven't ridden the train, in all 4 seasons, yes. It's just amazing. But, I think that the train is always open to new ideas, but at the same time, they really take pride in preserving history.
Preserving the history, the history of it, the respect for it, everything that was dark and everything that is incredibly innovative and just such a perfect example of the American way of conquering the West, which again has its dark side and its positive side. But right now we're celebrating the positive side. And Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out from this incredibly busy day and talking to us and the audience of the Don Sullivan Show. So thanks a whole lot, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Well, folks, we're headed back down from Silverton to Durango, and the train has to turn around through this wonderful little town of 300 permanent residents that gets 144 inches of snow a year at near 9,000 feet, surrounded by mountains and waterfalls here in the western part of Colorado. We're going to look at some other things on the way down. Obviously, the perspective is totally reversed, so this should be a lot of fun. So I'll have some more commentary as we go down the mountain back to Durango. So, folks, the train had to stop there for a few minutes on the way back down to Durango from Silverton. There's a whole bunch of different possibilities as to why that would have happened. And the area that we're in, about halfway down, is euphemistically called the bowling alley. And the reason it's called that is that rocks apparently fall off of the cliffs and can land on the track. Or can actually even hit the train, but usually that doesn't happen. But there certainly are possibilities of the train being derailed, or at least one wheel of one car being derailed. That didn't happen here, but there were rocks that were on the track. And the engineer, in his very adept way, was able to spot those rocks and stop the train, and folks were able to get off and clear off the tracks, and we are back on again to finish our route back down into Durango. As we move along down towards Durango, I really do want to point out and emphasize something that Jennifer had said, that a number of these narrow gauge and historic railways throughout the West do run year-round, and they run 4 seasons. In particular, this train, Durango-Silverton, they have different routes with different specifications, but I've been on the winter and I've now been on the summer train, and I definitely want to go on the fall train at some point, because and I'm really verifying this as we're driving along, the number of aspen trees and other trees that change colors, but particularly the aspens, which can change to yellow and some change to bright red. Absolutely incredible. And it's true all through Colorado and a lot into Idaho and somewhat into Utah as well, that you get these aspen groves that light up literally like they're light bulbs within them at the right time of the year for a couple of weeks, sometime between late September and through October. It's absolutely magnificent. And this type of journey that we're on these trains takes you in the backcountry where you normally wouldn't go unless you're a pretty hardcore backpacker or hiker even. And this is definitely something I recommend to anybody who comes out to Colorado, or anybody who just wants to see that kind of scenery. But we're getting close here now, and when we get down towards Durango, I'll finish out this episode and see if we have anything else to talk about as we get down into Durango. So I'll see you in a minute. Well, we're ending our journey through the Animas Valley, the Animas Gorge, along the Animas River on the Durango-Silverton Railroad. It's a wonderful journey of all kinds of adventures and stories and history and anecdotes from Hollywood through government, dark side, and innovative accomplishment. And I can only encourage everyone who listens to the Don Sullivan Show to come out and take one of these railroads at some point and spend some time just meandering along the great mountains and the great spots of the American West, or someplace else in the world. But we are going to end it, and we have to get off. And it's been a wonderful time, and I thank you all again for listening. Download all the episodes of the Don Sullivan Show. Collect them all. And folks, even though this is an episode focused on railroads and mountains, just remember, and remember this well, all at-bats are situational. And until next time, we'll see you soon.